Hello everyone, my name is Lillian Del Cruz, and today I'm going to present to you my research project being Malaria's role in the rise of Christianity in the Middle Ages. To begin, I think it's important to understand the perception of the disease within this period. People believed that the disease was caused by miasma, and this is how malaria became the word it is because it was thought to be caused by bad air. It wasn't up until the 19th century people realized that malaria was caused by the Plasmodium parasite, which is transmitted through female Anopheline mosquito vectors. The disease, more specifically, is spread when a mosquito takes a blood meal from a malarial infected human. The parasite develops within the mosquito, eventually deeming it to be infective, and then when it takes its next blood meal from an uninfected human, it can transmit the disease through its bite. So, very much so, humans and mosquitoes are dependent on each other for malaria spread and survival. It's important to note also that there are different mosquito and parasite species which induce different febrile symptoms and affect the type of malaria present within a certain region. This is most evident actually within the medieval period because there was no unified definition of malaria, but there were diagnoses of the different fever symptoms induced by the different species of the malaria parasite, which is quite interesting. So there are a variety of factors that contribute to malaria's success or cessation, such as the climate. Is it warm? Is it humid? Is it favorable for not only the parasite, but for the vector and human populations to thrive? The species of the parasite or the mosquito, in reference to the last point, whether they can survive in a certain region, and population factors. Are there enough humans around to spread and sustain the disease in the first place? Symptoms of this disease include fever, enlarged spleen, and anemia. So, what evidence do we have for medieval endemic malaria being a thing? Well, we have primary source material such as hagiographical accounts of Gregory of Tours, which goes into the endemic nature of malaria within Paris, within France. And we also have people like Alcuin of York who self-report of a disease that partly recedes and partly remains, which seems very descriptive and suggestive of malaria. Charlemagne, additionally, is argued by some to have contracted and died from malaria. Other ways to look at malaria is through more direct modes of evidence, through aDNA sequencing, for example. In an infant graveyard in Umbria, Italy in 5th century, scientists excavated this graveyard and did DNA analysis on it. And in one of the 2 to 3 year old skeletons, they found a massive infection of Plasmodium falciparum, so the malaria parasite. And although they were only able to find one of these aDNA successful sequencing out of 40, it still signals that there was a massive infection and environmental conditions were favorable for its spread. So this likely was not a localized occurrence. And the fact that they weren't able to sequence the other samples was more likely due to our inability to scientifically obtain these materials currently with our current technologies, which we can also see on the left graph depicting Italy. On the right, we see a map of Europe, which corresponds to more indirect ways to measure malaria's presence in the Middle Ages. For example, cribra orbitalia is a symptom of anemia, so this happens within the skull bone, so people can observe whether people in these regions have that from that time period and correlate it with the presence of certain mosquito vectors in the region. So on the right diagram, we see population density of the Anopheles atroparvus mosquito. So we did see a trend in this study that this symptom, cribra orbitalia, corresponded with the population regions of this mosquito vector, suggesting maybe malaria was present in these areas and was the cause of this symptom. Other more circumstantial evidence looks at the environment, infrastructure, agriculture, and climate. You're trying to reconstruct a past, and while you may not have any direct evidence for it, you can try to set up what it was like and see whether or not it presented favorable conditions for malaria to spread in the first place. This is much less reliable, but it's very important to consider when reconstructing a past that has many holes and gaps in it within the first place, so we have to use logic to fill these in ourselves. So as for ancient and medieval treatments of malaria, this is where the rise of Christianity occurs. So in comparison to Christian methods of healing, pagans often relied more on divine intervention, and their healing, their cures were in the hands of the supreme power, whatever that may be. They used amulets, they prayed to goddesses. In reference to the Umbria study I mentioned earlier, they put rocks on skeleton limbs to prevent the demonic malaria from invading and hurting other people. It was very much superstitious and definitely represented the lack of understanding of the actual causative agent of the disease. It's not like the Christian peoples and methods of healing were that much better. They actually believed, at least when Sylvester the Pope, who actually converted Constantine in the 3rd century, that there was a dragon underneath Rome and he was breathing out miasmic breaths, essentially causing malaria, and that Pope Sylvester helped quell the dragon. So there's definitely the sense of superstition we see in paganistic religions. And we also see that a lot of the healing focused on miracles through saints, such as drinking certain water from a stream where a saint was, or standing next to a tomb, such stuff like that. But one of the key parts of Christianity was its healing theology and how it was rhetorically presented, the emphasis on charity, the emphasis on helping poor people, inclusive monastery hospitals, and even if you did die from disease, you had the promise of salvation in the afterlife. Everything became so much more accessible than paganistic religions were, because you had this religious order on earth through saints and monks who actually tried to help these people, and often as a prerequisite, like in hospitals, they would require these people, these sick people, malaria infected people, to follow monastic code or to become Christian even. So this was a big role in the conversion process to Christianity, simply by providing people simple housing, simple care. People felt like they owed themselves to the religion, and many times appreciated the religion for all it did, because paganistic religions did not do this as much for sick, poor people. As for the conclusions and modern-day relevance of this talk, I want to emphasize that malaria was a factor within medieval history, and Christianity's success, while it maybe not played the primary role, it definitely played a part. And it's essential to look back at these sorts of things, look back at how malaria played a role within Christianity's rise, because it's still relevant today. We need to understand the present and prepare for the future to look at the past. We need to understand malaria's symptoms not only on the human body, but on society, economics, and religion. It's a disease that hurts people not only through its mode of bodily infection and disease, but also it's a disease that can hurt people and be taken advantage of to restructure society, economics, and religion in the favor of or against the favor of certain groups of people. For example, in Christianity, with its rise, even though in many ways it could have been beneficial to different groups of people through hospitals. It also targeted heretics and often persecuted different groups of people, so it wasn't all sunshine and roses. Everything is balanced on a fine line between helping and hurting, and we need to understand the implications of disease far more than just symptoms of the body. So, if you're interested in knowing more about my project or having any of the sources, I tried to put the sources, but even at a 5-point font, they would not fit. Please email me for any more questions. I'd be happy to answer them, and thank you. Hope you have a great winter break.